After the Denver Broncos victory against the Dallas Cowboys, we're going to take a look at some of the risers and fallers on the Broncos depth chart after week one of preseason action and ahead of the first roster cuts that the Denver Broncos have to make. You get that and much more on today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos country? Happy Monday. Welcome into a brand new episode, Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much to everybody in Broncos country who tunes in and makes Locked on Broncos their first listen of the day every single day, whether you listen on your favorite audio podcasting platform or whether you watch us on YouTube. Do us a favor, hit that subscribe or that follow button if you have yet to do so already so you never miss out on a day's worth of Denver Broncos news, content, coverage, and more from the South Stands to the end zone. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, senior Broncos analyst and reporter for Mile High Sports, joined alongside by my co-host, Sayre Bedinger, site expert, ProudlyOrange.com. Sayre, my friend, hey, you know what? Week one of the preseason is officially in the wraps. The Broncos will now shift their focus on preparing for the Buffalo Bills. I'm not sure necessarily how much they'll prepare for Buffalo schematically. I think they're going back to watch the film this week, and then we're going to take a look at themselves. And I know Nathaniel Hackett wants to get the run game going. We're going to talk about some risers and fallers here on today's episode of the show. We're going to take a look at risers on offense. We're going to take a look at risers on defense. And we're going to take a wide scope on potential players who have fallen maybe a little bit on the depth chart or projected roster ahead of roster cuts towards the later end of the show. My man, I can't wait to break it all down with you and everybody in Broncos country.
Can't wait. Thanks to everyone for tuning in and listening and watching on YouTube if you're watching here. And if you're not, like Cody said, jump on that. It's a great place to be. I think for sure, Cody, I was looking at this, the inactives for this game against the Dallas Cowboys, over 20 players. So that means that, my goodness, I mean, nearly 70 guys got the opportunity to go out there and show what they can do. The Broncos do have a lot of roster spots solidified, as evidenced by the number of players that did sit out, but there was plenty of opportunity to be had out there on offense, defense, special teams. I think really you can't ask for a much better overall performance, can you? I mean, for a preseason game, yes, there were some sloppy play from both sides and some things that you wish you could have back, some plays that, man, Russell Wilson makes that throw, or Javonte Williams and Melvin Gordon hit that hole, different things like that. But I think absolutely, for as far as the evaluation goes, and just the fact the Broncos won the game, it makes everything all the more positive. You see everything in a more positive light. I think the Broncos, there's a lot to gain from this kind of evaluation, and there were a lot of guys that played well.
Well, let's take a look at our Denver Broncos risers on the offensive side of the ball after week one of preseason action, starting things off with Kendall, Hinton. Obviously, there's a lot of love, I think, by Broncos country, a lot of respect towards Hinton for his time stepping up as a quarterback against the New Orleans Saints a couple of years ago for this Broncos team. But he really has come out and he's carved himself a role as a wide receiver. He's developed trust with Russell Wilson. He's been a guy that Russell Wilson has consistently name-dropped all throughout the offseason. And what we saw from him in week one of the preseason against the Dallas Cowboys was going out there and making big time plays. And we're talking about tracking the football, locating it, having some smart IQ play to him, but not to mention, we talked about it in the post-game report, going up and high pointing the ball, which is something we necessarily haven't seen him do. I grant that it's probably a little bit of reason because he doesn't have that many volume targets over his career in the NFL. So maybe it's something that, hey, Kendall Hinton is growing into this role here. Could he be the clear-cut wide receiver for? I think a lot of this conversation has to be, maybe brought on about, like, is he wide receiver 4? Or is that like Montrell Washington? Not necessarily like wide receiver 4, but I feel like Montrell is a roster lock as is. I think that we already know the 4 guys that we believe are locks. That's Cortland, that's Jerry, that's KJ, and that's Montrell. Is Kendall the 5th guy there? And he can obviously, like I said, be that wide receiver 4 at some point. He was reliable, though. What are your thoughts on Hinton?
I was really surprised. I think we talked in the post-game episode just about kind of how shocked we both were about seeing him go up and really get that ball in a one-on-one situation. Kind of put the little, they mentioned it on the broadcast. I don't know if you've rewatched the broadcast at all yet, Cody, but they kind of mentioned he had the little veteran push off at the last second there. He kind of had his hand. It wasn't illegal, obviously. Just out there kind of playing like a veteran. And I think that's what Kendall Hinton brings to the table. He's been around for a long time now. I mean, 2020 feels like a lifetime ago because of everything that transpired during that year. But Kendall Hinton, he basically experienced a lifetime of NFL things in one season. You know, he was on the practice squad as a receiver, and then he got into the game as the emergency QB, and then he kind of earned the respect, I think, of everybody in the franchise and got his way onto the active roster for that rest of that season there. And from that point on, it just kind of feels like, man, he's such a natural at the position, right? He's not just a slot possession guy. He doesn't look like, I don't know exactly what you picture when you think of this is a former quarterback playing the wide receiver position. He doesn't necessarily strike me as the former quarterback playing wide receiver. And I guess, like I said, I don't know exactly what that looks like. Those come in all different shapes and sizes. We see former QBs playing tight end, and we see them playing, different spots on the offense. So Kendall Hinton is a unique guy for me. I feel like he's got a lot of potential playing the slot, playing outside, getting those one-on-one matchups, just showing off some really strong hands and some nice savvy out there. Kind of what I mean by, or what I think when I think of who's the wide receiver for. It's if KJ Hamler's not playing, this guy is going to be in your starting lineup essentially as the third guy. I think Hinton could be that guy. Like you said, Montreal Washington, a lock for the team. At this point, it's competition behind those guys, though.
And that's really the biggest question. How many wide receivers is Denver going to keep? I know that's the question of the offseason. And I personally still think they're going to keep 7. I think realistically that last 7th spot on the roster, I think is going to be a competition between Seth Williams and Jalen Virgil. I think the other guy that we're going to talk about here, and Brandon Johnson, I think he is this year's undrafted gem for the Broncos. And even Brian Baldinger posted something on his Twitter feed, the film breakdown. There were some things that Brandon Johnson did really well. He played like a true veteran there. And a lot of it was understanding timing, situational football. He understood how to throttle down for his size where he's at as a wide receiver. But he also understood, okay, I caught the ball. We're in a 2-minute drill. I got up really quickly and I need to run, get the ball to the official, get set. And he did just that, catching a ball out of bounds to get his 2 feet in there to set up a Brendan McManus field goal. That was one thing that stood out to me, not to mention just his big play and focus there to be able to track the football down the left sideline. And a lot of this is coming off of Josh Johnson right now. Josh Johnson feeding guys that we've been talking about, Kendall Hinton, Seth Williams, Brandon Johnson in the first preseason game. Is he the clear-cut quarterback number 2? He got off to a sluggish start, I will say that, but I thought he finished the game really well. And after the game in the locker room, he said, hey, everyone's got to overcome a little bit of adversity. I don't think that the quarterback competition between he and Brett Rippon is necessarily solved just yet. Will Brett Rippon get the start against the Buffalo Bills? And then they'll have Josh Johnson go with this backup unit. I wonder if that's going to be what the coaching staff does. But these 3 names here, Sayre Bedinger, my friend, these are risers on the offensive side of the ball for this Denver Broncos football team heading into week 2 of the NFL preseason. But we got to take a look at the risers on the defensive side of the ball. Who are some of the defensive standouts that elevated their name even further, and maybe some guys who rose up the depth chart after week 1 of the NFL preseason? We get to that coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, let me tell you about our good friends over there at BetterHelp. Life is full of twists and turns, and it's important to show up for yourself through it all. And BetterHelp Online Therapy will assess your needs and can match you with your own licensed professional therapist in less than 48 hours. I was matched to mine within 24 hours when I signed up at BetterHelp.com. It's not a crisis line. It's not a self-help. It's professional therapy done online securely, available to people worldwide. With therapy, it can take a few tries to find the right fit for you, and BetterHelp makes it easy and free to change therapists if needed. Your fit with the therapist is super important to them, and they want to make sure that they get it right. They take great care of me. And the cool thing I like about BetterHelp is that you can do online video sessions and chats every single week. I chat with mine at my scheduled time. She'll call me on my phone through the app that they have built in, and I get to go through things, create action-based items that will help me with some of the decisions I make in my day-to-day life, all at BetterHelp. And they have a special listener for my listeners here, Locked On Broncos. You can get 10% off your first month at BetterHelp.com/LockedOn. That's 10% off your first month of online therapy at BetterHelp.com/LockedOn. Several defensive players stood out for the Denver Broncos in their 17-7 victory over the Dallas Cowboys in Saturday's preseason action. But which players rose up a little bit on the depth chart after Saturday's performance? Thank you so much, Broncos Country, for making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. Free and available on your favorite podcasting provider and available on YouTube to watch in 4K high definition on your phone, on your computer, or your TV. We have you covered every single day with all the Denver Broncos news, content, coverage that you need. Sayre, my friend, let's take a look at the defensive side of the ball. You know me. I love the defense. I love breaking down the defense. And when I was in the press box, I was looking at a lot of formations that they were doing, trying to counter the Dallas Cowboys. And I just saw different pieces that really stood out to me. And obviously the big blow, we all talked about it in our post-game report, Jonas Griffith's injury is huge. But I think that there was one guy who elevated his stock a little bit in Saturday's preseason action. That is Justin Strnad. I might even throw Alex Singleton on there. But I mean, Alex Singleton, I think the expectation is that if something were to happen, he would be the guy and that he would step up. He showed it. But I want to highlight Justin Strnad because I felt like he had a very good game for the Broncos defense. And I think finally he's playing in a system, and he, like he said, he told me after the game, he's having fun playing football again, which kind of alludes to maybe he didn't get put in the right situations last year by Vic Fangio and his staff. It's always one of those things up for debate there. But for me, I thought that he stepped up. Now, this year, could the Broncos count on him potentially if they need him to start? I feel like Sayre, just based on what we've seen so far, I've seen him all training camp. I've seen him so far through 1 week of preseason. I feel like he would do better if called upon and put into a situation to start than he would have last year. And I think he even feels the same way.
Yeah, I really think Justin Strnad did a great job of kind of maybe just kind of quelling some concerns. Can I use that word on this podcast, Cody? Quelling? I don't think I've ever used it. I think
I don't know what that is.
I know, yeah, right. Exactly. I know I've heard that word before used in that context, so it must mean the right thing. No, I know what it means. But I think definitely the perception of these linebackers that the Broncos had behind Jonas Griffith and Josie Jewell was that they just weren't very good. Like, I think Alex Singleton and Justin Strnad had a long way to go to kind of gain the approval of Broncos country. And yes, it's just one preseason game. And yes, by default, they are technically risers after this game just because of that injury. But at the same time, I think they both went out there and did some really good things. I was rewatching the game earlier this morning, Cody, and I noticed that there was a play where a Dallas Cowboys receiver was kind of bagged on by a lot of the Cowboys people that I follow on Twitter for dropping an easy, quote unquote, easy third down pass. And really the reason why he dropped the pass is because Alex Singleton kind of snuck up into the throwing lane without anybody even really being able to see it in the live broadcast. And I know that wasn't one of the camera faux pas that we had throughout this preseason game. It was just Alex Singleton being sneaky quick out there and making a big play. So I think for sure those two guys definitely risers for me in terms of this preseason game, at least in terms of maybe just helping you sleep a little bit better at night, knowing that those two guys are on the team. You're going to be in pretty good hands. Alex Singleton's played quite a bit. Justin Strnad looks like he might be breaking out a little bit as well.
And I think that's a good thing for the Broncos right now. And we'll see this week if they make any additional moves to add another linebacker at some point, just because, hey, you never know. You're another injury away, essentially, with 2 preseason games remaining from being in dire straits at the linebacker position. But you know what? There is a little bit of a security blanket in a guy that, we've heard this before in the offseason. If they need to move him there in a pinch, they can. And that is Baron Browning, whose stock has risen significantly. I mean, Sayre, this isn't a hot take, and I hope it doesn't sound like a hot take, but if Randy Gregory isn't available, isn't ready to go week 1 for this Broncos football team against the Seattle Seahawks, I would really like to see Bradley Chubb and Baron Browning get the start at edge rusher. Am I wrong for thinking that?
I don't think so. Not at all. I think that would be a lot of fun. And in fact, I think I'm jealous that you get to be out at practice. I don't know if you've seen that combo out there at practice just to see how they explode off the ball, especially with Draymond Jones in the fold and DJ Jones. And my goodness, I mean, like Broncos country, let's get ready for something really good to be happening on this defensive front because the talent there is, dare I say, like you said, I don't want to be hot take, but dare I say, is it as good of talent up there as they had in 2015? I mean, that's pretty lofty considering Von Miller and DeMarcus Ware were there. But in terms of talent, I mean, you could make the argument that it's up there. So I'm excited to see just these guys work together. I'm excited to see Baron Browning get more opportunities. And definitely, he's a riser, I think, for everybody. I know for a fact, I saw it a number of times that Von Miller's name was thrown out there on Twitter in comparison to Baron Browning just in a preseason game. And on one hand, you're like, you roll your eyes at it. On the other hand, though, I mean, from everything to the explosion off the ball to the sack dance, was it not reminiscent a little bit of Von Miller? I mean, he certainly won a lot of people over. And I think, man, talking about him in the starting lineup with Bradley Chubb in the regular season, if Randy Gregory can't go or if he's only able to play like 30-40% of the snaps, to me, I think the Broncos are in a great situation right there.
Shout out to Baron Browning. He got 2 pumps and not 3, so he didn't get flagged on a play after his sack on a Dallas Cowboys quarterback there. But yeah, I mean, it did look like a Von Miller because he had that creepy little bend and almost kind of like he was crawling on the ground. We've seen Von Miller do this so many times. And you know what? Maybe he learned a little bit from Von Miller in a sense there. So it might have to be something we keep an eye on here. But also another shout out here to Matt Henningsen, who in my opinion has risen up a little bit. He got the start for the Broncos against the Dallas Cowboys because Denver didn't play a lot of their starters. He played all 4 quarters. I tell you what, he was a consistent disruptor there. And I think for me watching that, him seeing that in a live game, I said, okay, hey, he's learning. He's picking it up. He's making strides there. And if we get a chance to speak with the Giro Evero this week, I want to ask him about Matt Henningsen and kind of what his initial impressions were from him, because I thought initially on the first glance and the second watch through, I thought number 91 did a really good job for the Broncos. So in my opinion, he's rising up a little bit and maybe rises up above a little bit McTelvin Agim in this situation. So that'll be something we monitor this week. Can Agim rise to the occasion and have a bounce back game or have a better game than a guy like Henningsen against the Buffalo Bills? But Broncos country coming up here in just a moment. We're going to ask the question, which players could be on the roster bubble ahead of roster cuts? 4 p.m. Eastern time on Monday is the deadline for the Broncos to go from 90 players on their active roster to 85. We talk about some players who we think are on the bubble, who need to step up if they make the roster this upcoming week. We get that coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, let me tell you about BetOnline.net, the sponsor of today's episode, Locked On Broncos. BetOnline.net is the fastest and the easiest way to check in on all your betting needs. You can find all your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. You can find reviews and news of every single league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and even golf. And BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all your sports wagering information, from live in-game betting, scores, and podcasts. They have you covered. So head to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to learn more about the action happening today. BetOnline, where the game starts. As we jump into the fourth quarter action on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, we're going to take a look at some of the players who need to step up a little bit more in practice this week, who could be on the roster bubble ahead of cuts on Monday, 4 o'clock p.m. Eastern time. Thank you once again, Broncos country, for making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day on your favorite podcast and provider here on YouTube. We appreciate you so much. Sayre, let's get into the discussion right here. You know, there's several players I feel like we can highlight. Denver's going to have to trim the roster by 5 players. Whether one of those moves is like an injury designation, I'm not sure. I think if they put Jonas Griffith on IR, I think that would end his season. So I don't think they're going to do that. So I'm eager to see what the Broncos decide to do at this point. They could put him on the PUP for a few weeks. I'm not entirely sure what the case is and how that necessarily works here. But there are some players from the week 1 matchup that I felt like simply didn't do enough, in my opinion, that if you had to trim down the roster, these were players that would probably be first on the list. Let's take a look at wide receiver. And I know this has been a deep room that we've talked about, but I feel like, you know, despite how good of a training camp he's had, I didn't think that Trey Quinn had a game that stood out, in my opinion, in the preseason. It just didn't seem like he had it. There was one play that threw a kind of a bubble to him, and he had 2 yards to get the first down. He tried to make a move and just simply couldn't get upfield. And I don't think that's his game. I don't think he's going to be a guy that's going to shift and try to juke people out. So that was an area I just didn't think that we saw enough from him. And with the other guys that have stepped up and made plays, it's going to be very hard to justify, you know, bringing a guy like Trey Quinn onto the active roster.
Yeah, I think so. And a couple of throws his direction in the game, a little off target, to be honest.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he did have one opportunity there on a slant play. I can't remember exactly what the situation was in the game, but he had a ball that was right on him on a slant route, and he just couldn't come down with it. So I definitely agree. I think you look at those really overcrowded positions like wide receiver first and foremost, and some guys that did get a lot of run in this game as compared to guys that might not have. You know, we didn't see a lot of Caden Davis with the offense, Cody. I feel like that's because we're going to get to see more of him forthcoming, and so that could lead to exactly what you said, like Trey Quinn potentially this was his audition for the team, and you've seen the other guys kind of separate. Now it's like, okay, we're going to try to decide who's going to make the practice squad. I think the same could be true of the tight end position as well. And just looking at these young guys, and I thought really the tight end position was very, very, I don't want to say undervalued, but it wasn't highlighted almost at all in this game. Eric Tomlinson made the biggest play in the passing game for sure, which is
who had that on their bingo card? Who had an Eric Tomlinson
did.
vertical play for a first down on their bingo card? I did not.
They got it right. Whoever had that, they sure have a bingo
True.
at this point. So, and especially those undrafted tight ends, Rodney Williams and Dylan Parham. I feel like they were out on the field, but we didn't really get to see any of them highlighted. So, do you kind of just, if you're the Broncos, do you decide based on practices? Maybe is one of those guys separated themselves more than the other, or is one a better practice squad more candidate more than the other? I think that's kind of going to be a determining factor here because five players seem so minimal, but you look at this roster and it's kind of like, well, where are those five going to come from? And I think so the offensive skill positions certainly are where you might start.
Well, and let's take a look now at running back here as well. It's going to be hard to see if the Broncos make any cuts at that position just because they're probably not going to play Javonte, Melvin, and, they started Mike Boone in the game on Saturday against the Cowboys. But you have some other guys there. Max Borgi, you want to get him some run. And unfortunately, the Broncos offense in general, neither of the running backs could get anything going. I mean, there was 22 rushing attempts for 39 yards. Nathaniel Hackett was not very happy with that. So that touches on not only just the backs and some of these guys being new and having to learn the playbook in a couple of days. That could be a factor. But the O-line not blocking really well when some of those guys were in. Not even Mike Boone could really get some good run. Couldn't hit the hole. Couldn't see anything because the Cowboys did a good job penetrating there. So that's going to have to be something that changes. But I do think Stevie Scott, if the Broncos do look at maybe cutting a running back, Stevie Scott could be that guy because he had an opportunity for a wide open touchdown from Brett Rippon on that beautiful 96-yard drive orchestrated by Rippon and Jalen Virgil, and he dropped it. He dropped the pass. It hit him in the hands. It would have been an easy touchdown. Things like that, that hurts you. That counts against you when it comes to preseason evaluation. So there is that. Now I want to go a little bit to the defensive backside of things. I think for me, I'm a secondary guy, Sayre. You know this. I was kind of disappointed in Jamar Johnson's play a little bit in Saturday's game, and it has nothing to do with anything he did specifically, but he's just a guy that needs to make plays, and I think that's the thing. Like you have other players on this roster, PJ Locke, Caden Stearns, those guys are making plays. J.R. Reed made more plays than Jamar Johnson did in the Broncos' victory against the Cowboys, and Jamar had a really great opportunity to really lay claim to maybe a potential spot, that safety 5 spot, and it was an interception opportunity. Instead of going and attacking the football when it was wobbled in the air, he just waited for it to come to him. It hit him and allowed a Dallas Cowboys defender to come out and knock the pass out. Those missed opportunities can go against you in the preseason, and you got to see a little bit more from him. I felt like Donnie Lewis, number 39, struggled a little bit in coverage. Can he have a bounce-back week if he does make the active roster, if he's safe this week? These are some guys here that I feel like have fallen a little bit on the Broncos depth chart that could be on the bubble here this week when the Broncos prepare for roster cuts. Any rebuttals on that?
I think you're absolutely spot on. I think for Jamar Johnson, the Broncos really need to feature him and get him ready potentially for a trade. I mean, and I know that may seem kind of like a shotgun reaction or a knee-jerk reaction, but there's not enough roster spots right now for the amount of guys they have at safety on this current 90-man roster. So I think for Jamar Johnson, you find some team out there that really loved him in the pre-draft process. Maybe try to, like we've talked about, George Paton wants to add those draft picks, maybe flip him for a pick like they did Kerry Vincent last year when they traded a 7th-round guy for a 6th-round pick. There could be value there if Jamar Johnson can come out and bounce back, or if some team really valued him highly last year. But I think you're spot on with Donnie Lewis. He's one of those guys at a crowded position that just has to stand out really in a very significant way to make the roster. So I think you're accurate on those predictions there and those players that are kind of on the bubble. I will say too, running back Jaquan Hardy, as much as Stevie Scott missed an opportunity, I thought Hardy he had blockers out in front on a screenplay, a perfectly executed running back screen, and he missed an opportunity, in my opinion, to hit pay dirt as well. So I think the running back position is kind of all 3 of those guys are kind of questionable for me as far as whether they'll be on the roster against Buffalo, but certainly some big decisions for George Paton, some tough decisions, which is indicative that this roster is very, very high quality.
It is, and it goes back to the point that you mentioned early on. There were over 20 players inactive, and that's really good. That means your depth is really dang good if you're going to rest 20 players, presumably a lot of your starters on the offense and defensive side of the ball. Love that with the Broncos. No need to risk injuries to your starters. Unfortunately, Denver loses a guy in Jonas Griffith, but there is hope that he could be back for the start of the regular season potentially, or maybe even a couple weeks afterwards. So that is a silver lining in a negative outcome for this Denver Broncos football team. But Broncos country, we want to know who you believe were risers and fallers in the Broncos game against the Dallas Cowboys. We shared our thoughts. We shared our picks. Now we want to hear from you in the YouTube comment section down below. Comment with your risers, comment with your fallers, and interact with us as well. And thank you so much for tuning in to Lockdown Broncos. That will wrap up today's episode of the show. Just remember, you get us here every single day. for all the Denver Broncos news, content coverage that you need every single day, all year long, on your favorite audio podcasting platforms, or whether you watch us on YouTube. Thank you so much. Sayre, Bedinger, and myself will be back tomorrow. The Broncos back on the practice field on Monday at the UCL Training Center as they prepare for week number 2 of the NFL preseason.